And I think now we are recording. Welcome to history class on Zoom. I was telling Karime in 2020, you guys probably remember doing a lot of Zoom classes. I think they're doable, but they're not. Hopefully we'll get the information done. And I knew you guys were already working on your homework and whatever. It's not even raining yet. So hopefully we'll all be dry and safe and back on campus on Tuesday. Hi, Kyrie, can you hear us okay?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, good. Just want to make sure. All right, so we just have to catch up a little bit. Let me share my screen. I haven't used Zoom in so long, which is so fun for you guys to watch me do it in real time. I didn't even think to try to figure out how to share my screen. What is my problem? Who remembers how to do that? Oh my gosh.
For me, at least, there's like a green share screen icon at the bottom.
Thank you. This one, of course, says that it won't share. That's so fun. I got a brand new computer, so maybe it's not approved. Oh, allow Zoom. Okay, hold on, guys. I just have to open my system preferences. This is the fun part of the recording for everybody. Yikes, sorry. I see the button I have to click. Okay, Zoom will not be able to record the screen until it's quit. So if I drop off, y'all stay on and I'll come right back on, okay? Thank you. I will make, Paris, you're coming up, Angelica, you're coming up as first. I'm just going to assign you the new.
Hey guys, I'm the new host. I see everybody's back at home. I'm glad you guys are safe. Hi, Beja. Hey, Danielle, Sydney, Jay, Jenna, Aaliyah, Courtney, Kareem, Robinson. Can't see you guys, Kyrie and Casey. I hope you guys are being safe.
All right, I'm going to steal the host back. Hi, guys. How are you doing? Everyone okay? Now I can share my screen. Ta-da. Okay. You guys can see the PowerPoint? Oh, but I bet I'm not recording. Oh, my God. Pause recording. I am recording. How fun. Okay, good. Go back. Okay, so let's just think a little bit about what we were talking about last class, and then we'll catch up to Mark's, where I think we have hopefully a lively conversation waiting for us. Factory industrialization, I think it's a familiar story, right? Machines replacing humans and animals, therefore mean new cultural changes, new gender roles, new living areas with urbanization, child labor that you guys read about in the Ashley Commission. So just sort of get a sense of this. And then we also looked at long-term effects. So yes, wealth and new opportunities, but also environmental problems, expansion of empires, which we'll focus on a little bit more today with attention to the Pacific area. And of course, displacing indigenous people. We'll talk more about that when we look at India more. Let's see. It says my interconnection is stable. Can you guys hear me okay? Okay, thank you. We talked about political responses. I just made a new slide as a summary that in the 19th century, a lot of these middle-class people tend to favor the ideas of liberalism, which we can think of like libertarianism, focus on individual liberty, less government involvement. A lot of the workers tended to be drawn to socialism, which was more about sharing and redistributing wealth and protecting the workers from some of the hardships of laissez-faire capitalism. The demands to really keep government out seemed to really hurt the workers. Communism was where we were finishing up last class, which is a subset of socialism. So there's other kinds of socialism that are not communism. Communism has some really distinct features that we'll zoom in on more today. I know we covered the history of history, which we'll come back to again today. But this idea that Marx is giving us a theory kind of separate from communism, so you can agree with his theory and view of history, but not want having anything to do with communism. In fact, he calls his socialism scientific socialism. It's also obviously called communism, because he thinks he's got the science behind him. He says it's always have versus have-nots in ancient Rome in the Middle Ages, and now today with the bourgeoisie versus the proletariat. We're going to have this inevitable class struggle. And who does he think is going to win that struggle? Someone just There's going to be a struggle, he says, in the 1850s, right? He predicts between the bourgeoisie versus the proletariat. Who does he say is going to win?
The bourgeois society?
No, the
No.
proletariat. He said inevitably that what's happening is capitalism is getting so bad. We talked about some of the problems in society, right, that he identifies. So the bourgeoisie has done some great things. They've pushed all this trade. They've established these world markets. Remember, there's a whole list of they've added more canals. They've improved all these things, communications, blah, blah, blah. I didn't copy that slide from last class. But they've also sown the seeds of their own destruction because they're so selfish and working class life is so hard. They are going to be the targets of a revolution, that the workers are going to rise up. Did you guys get that from the summary, maybe? From the excerpts that you read? Yes or no? Kind of.
It was a little hard for me to understand, so I don't know.
Okay. Well, it's also hard because I gave you such cut in pieces that it wasn't the whole thing.
But that makes sense.
So basically what he's talking about is like sorry, poor Engels, I leave him out. The Communist Manifesto is talking about, like, look at all these problems in society. And for him, they're problems created by this liberal capitalism, this laissez-faire capitalism. Workers are being exploited. And this capitalist system, remember, is reducing everybody to the paid wage labor, right? Everybody's about what you can earn. Nobody has this full human experience, even poets, even lawyers, even doctors, whatever, this whole list, right? Further, the family, marriage is really about economics. It's not really, I think he's thinking a lot about middle-class society. Women have to get married. Think about Mary Wollstonecraft or even Tristan. Women are being paid less. They have to get married for economic security. So capitalism is messing with those kind of relations that should be emotional. A long list of problems, right? He himself doesn't talk about overcrowding and smog and stuff, but Engels does in other writings. So they're fully aware of the price of some of the industrialization changes. Okay, so what they're saying is communism has some solutions. And this is what I want you guys to understand what they're proposing, and then we can talk about what you think about them. Because I could tell from the perusal that you have some feelings or some thoughts. Okay, so what is the Communist Party going to do about this? Right, number one, we're going to form all the workers into, they're going to recognize themselves as a group. They're going to overthrow the bourgeoisie, and they're going to achieve political power. And that's the part about the communism that I said is like a political party. Okay, so come to our meeting on Wednesday at 8. We're going to talk about it, right? So they're trying to like organize supporters the same way. I guess we tend to do it now more from, the phone, right? Click here, sign this petition, or, retweet this, whatever. But the idea is to generate support. So that's one. So the solution is going to be this revolution. Communism's big claim to fame, their big promise, is that they're the ones that are going to abolish private property. Let's look at this wording here. You are horrified and are intending to do away with private property. Who is the you here? Who is he talking to? That's a direct quote from the Communist Manifesto. Someone jump in.
The bourgeois society. Or would he be referring to everybody?
So yeah, it's a little bit tricky, right? Because on the one hand, he's saying, come to our meeting Wednesday at 8, but he doesn't think bourgeoisie are going to come. So he's kind of talking to both groups, saying, you're reading this and you're horrified about the idea of someone taking away your private property. How do you guys feel about the idea of someone taking away private property? Allison's shaking her head. She's for it. Other people?
I honestly wouldn't like it. I feel like if you take away private property and like give it to the government, that means like everything's up to them. So like if you do something that they don't like, they could easily just like take your house away or your business or whatever.
Okay. Yeah, so this fear of losing control, absolutely, Sydney. I think that's a very predictable and understandable reaction. Anybody else? I mean, the sort of like the stereotypical American dream is that everybody wants their own house, right? They want like a house, a car, 2.5 kids or whatever. That's like kind of the story. I think very much a lot of our American identity is wrapped up with the idea of house, or like we, and so other societies also, right? Like you've bought the house, or maybe it's a house you've inherited from your great grandparents, but it's still in your family. So you might say that's outrageous, right? This is mine. And his response is, I think, again, very society oriented, community oriented. Like, yeah, that's great for you, but in our society, private property is already done away with. Like 90% of the people don't get to own property because they don't make enough money. He's saying he hasn't really done the studies. He's kind of just throwing 9/10 out there. But you see his point, right? Like, that's great. You have a family house you can inherit, or that's great. You've made enough money. What about all these other people that have worked in the mine since they're 6? They're never going to make enough money to own a house or even an apartment, right? They're going to always be renting. But that's sort of one of communism's big promises. Now, what if you're one of these 90% people, or you're living in this society, you're the miner, or you're the working class person? How does abolishing private property sound to you? And that, if you're this other person.
I say probably not that good. Because if with private property, everyone gets equally like the profit, then why would you work?
Okay, so
now that it's gone, they have to work to gain stuff.
interesting. Okay, that's an interesting take. I mean, I think the idea would be, right now there's like a 1-bedroom apartment that 2 families are living in with 1 bathroom. There's another 4-bedroom house that 1 family is living in with 4 bathrooms. So why don't we move in the extra family, or 2 extra families into the other house, and make it more fair? And I hear your concern about working, and he's got a solution for that too. But you can see maybe as a worker why this might appeal, right? If you're crowded up, or you're living under a bridge, or you're having a really hard life, the idea of having a little more, it might mean a lot less for somebody, but it'd be a little more for you. That might be really appealing. So just want you to you can be on both, like put your mind in both places, like the bourgeoisie out, like what would they think, but also what would the workers think, and why would this be maybe appealing? Okay. The communists are going to abolish countries and nationality. The last line, got a slide for it. It's very famous. He said, "Working men of the world unite," or you have nothing to lose but your chains. I saw you guys talked about that in the perusal. Around a lot. He's raised German, but Germany's not even a country yet. He's lived in France. He's lived in Belgium. He's living most of his adult life in London. He was traveling around a lot. He doesn't really feel national ties. And so he's like, national ties just get in the way. So we're not going to have that. What we're going to have is all the countries, all the workers of the world are going to come together and make this utopia of sharing. When you think of communism, think of the way he's promising it as sort of, if you know, like a hippie commune. Like, think about that word rather than the communism of Stalin. I think what he wants is like a giant hippie commune. Like, everyone's going to be sharing, everyone's going to work together, right? Like, I mean, in a very, I don't know. I think for you guys, some of you were saying naive way, but I think that's what he's envisioning. He says right now the working men have no country, like no one's looking out for them, don't have the vote in almost all of these places. So you can't take away what they don't have. Is what his point is. Oops, I forgot the F. I'll go back and add it. Okay, so what are the communists promising? What's their party plan? You guys went through this list already in perusal. What stands out to you as a reasonable ask? As something that, like, if you're living in 1840s Europe, in the middle of the Industrial Revolution, these are helpful things to propose to make life better for more people.
Definitely the free education for all the kids in public schools.
Good. Yeah. I mean, I think you guys were worried a little bit about the idea of the state controlling schools and manipulating people. And I think that's a totally appropriate anxiety. But what they also mean is right now there's no school. If you can't afford a private tutor or afford to send your kids to these private schools that exist, your kids don't go to school. And in fact, they work in the mines instead. So if the state requires them to be in school, maybe they'll have a chance of getting out of that, right? Maybe they can find a different life doing something else. An abolition of children's factory labor, right? So the idea is resetting so the next generation, you know, kind of has a chance, I think. What other things?
I personally agree with the graduated income tax. I don't know if everybody would agree with that, so I don't want to trigger anyone politically. But
No, you have to agree with that basically, because the other choice is an income tax that's not where if everyone pays $1,000, if you make $100,000, that feels very different than if you make $10,000, right? So in America, we absolutely have that. We have a graduated income tax where if you make a little bit, tiny little bit, you pay nothing, and then you pay a little bit more, like once you get to each threshold. So everyone's first, whatever number is, $250,000, right, are taxed at the same break, and then after that, it's taxed at more or whatever. So you pay more if you make more. You pay a higher percent because it's like you've already guaranteed some of your basic living. And I think almost all industrial countries have that. That didn't exist at the time. There isn't an income tax at the time. So the idea is to do it that way. I mean, no taxes would be great, right? But then how do we have public schools and fire departments? So the community has to contribute something. You know, how much more above and beyond that? That's, I think, Paris Angelica's good point about not getting in a big political debate where we all try to figure out how to spend all the tax money. But I think that's a good one to look at, and we absolutely have that. In America, we have limited inheritance, number 3. In Europe, they don't have as much limited. I saw you guys debating about that one as well. I think the goal of that, again, is to not lock in, like your great-great-grandparents did something, and now you're on top kind of forever, while someone else whose great-great-grandparents didn't is on the bottom forever. So the idea is somehow rejiggering it so that you've got to work for the thing. Which is somewhat of an American ideal as well, right? Like we don't have titles and we do have at least some inheritance tax. We don't really worry about the rebels, number 4. We do have banks. We have banks that are protected. So that idea of centralizing credit in banks. If your bank goes out of business, you know, it's insured and you'll get support from the government, which didn't exist until the Great Depression, but it exists in America. Transport communication, you still have to have a license, like to run a TV station, you have to have a license from the state. Transportation, a lot of that, like the roads, right, or the Department of Transportation controls that. So I just wanted you to see there are some of the things here that are, like Marx would have a time machine and be like, wow, you guys got a lot of them done. I think we would all consider ourselves a capitalist society. Maybe if you disagree with me, jump in. Fine. But I think Marx would say, wow, we actually have a lot of socialist changes that in 1840 were really hard to imagine would ever happen. So the list is in some ways really far-fetched, right? We're certainly not abolishing private property, which is their number 1 goal. We're not requiring everyone to work, number 8. We're not just redistributing the populace, number 9. Factories aren't owned by the state, right? So a lot of this, no, but a lot of it has been adapted. And I think one of the reasons, one of the things to remember, Marx thinks all of this is going to happen inevitably, right? He says, you know, working men of all countries unite. But it doesn't. It certainly hasn't happened in the way he described it's happening. It hasn't ever happened. It doesn't happen at all for the 60 years after he writes this book. And then it happens in Russia, which he never would have expected. And then like Cuba and China, places that he wasn't even thinking about. And I think part of the reason is he misunderstands how flexible capitalism is. He assumes that capitalism is going to always stay like it was in the 1840s, but instead, the bourgeoisie, the government, politicians, lawmakers, right, have been more flexible, and they've been like, well, actually, let's do protect children. Like, we don't have to be socialist to protect children. Let's make that is good for everybody. Like, okay, let's do guarantee the banks. Let's do set up a income tax policy, blah, blah, blah. Does that make sense? Okay, that's sort of I think that's the basic bit. Let's talk about some of your concerns. I think Courtney's expressed a concern, rightly so, that if everyone's sort of given a place to live, and if everyone's kind of paid basically the same for their jobs, what's the incentive to work? Does anyone want to speak either from their own point of view or from Marx and Engels' point of view? How would they respond to that?
I think he's expecting everybody to work just out of the unity that he's expecting everybody to have, like just out of the, like, you should be doing this to benefit your society because it's enabling your way of life right now.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's a great point. I think Marx is a huge optimist about human nature, right? What are people really like? People really just want a nice life and they want their neighbors to be happy and they want to be happy. I mean, I don't think he has a lot of anxieties about, you know, them competing with each other. Other concerns or thoughts about communism?
I'm very
I mean, or
concerned.
pros?
I'm sorry.
Go ahead. No,
I
no.
was concerned about the fairness for like everybody getting paid the same, like somebody doing a much harder job getting paid the same as somebody doing a not as hard job. I don't want to give examples, so, you know, I don't want to demean anybody's work.
What do you guys think? Someone want to respond to that?
I mean, I think so too. I agree with that because it's not demeaning anybody's work, but like here, for example, like university degrees are sometimes like valued more, I guess. And like every job in society has a purpose, but sometimes some jobs are a little harder. Sometimes more manual skill is needed, and sometimes more like, I don't want to say academic skill, but like I think it depends, but I don't think it should be all the same because different efforts.
Okay.
It all, sorry, building off of what you just said, like it also depends on how much money you put into that, because like doctors going to medical school, you have, or like lawyers going to law school, like it's a lot of money to get a degree like that.
And effort and time. Oh my gosh, all those medical professionals have to learn all those body parts, y'all. That's hard work. Let's look at it. Here's what Marx might say. What if you have a hospital with no janitors? What are the odds of you getting well? Right? That's essential work. What if you have a hospital with no one working in the cafeteria? No one making the food to feed the patients? The hospital doesn't work. What if you have a hospital with no plumbers to fix the plumbing or electricians? You know, like his point is, let's look holistically. Let's think about all those jobs. In order for the community to survive, we need all those jobs. Why shouldn't, well, how about raise the janitor and the plumber salaries and the cafeteria people and lower the doctor salaries, and maybe everyone makes the same as whoever. This is a weird example because I don't know a lot about healthcare, but anyway. But I mean, isn't that more fair, right? All those people are vital for you to get well. Or something, right? Or a doctor who does brain surgery, is that more important than the doctor, the pediatrician who sees your sick kid? Why should they make more or whatever? So I think his point is sort of thinking, again, more about the community. I'm not trying to sell y'all on communism. I just want you to think about kind of from his approach, right? What he's promising based on kind of what he's seeing in his society, which is outrageous income inequality. Right, like that picture we saw with the, you know, the people with servants on the top and the people living kind of in super poverty on the bottom. And so he's like, can't we meet in the middle a little bit more? But I think Marx is wrong about a lot of things. So I also want you to feel okay to be angry at Marx. I think we can't really, I don't think as a class we can judge if Marx is right about human nature, because I don't want you guys to all have the same view of human nature. So some of you might be optimists and some of you might be pessimists, and none of us know what humans are really like other than what we believe. So let's like set the human nature bit aside. Like, are people naturally lazy or naturally sharing? I think some of the problems Marx doesn't notice, Marx is so interested in class, right? He's so concerned, are you a worker or an owner? Right? Are you white collar, blue collar? Are you bourgeoisie or proletariat? I think he forgets that actually a lot of us are a lot of things. If we were in class right now, I'd like write identity on the board. I mean, think about your identity, right? How do you describe yourself to somebody? Let's say, I want to say a Martian, but that's probably not realistic. A French person. Say a French person, like you meet them on the street or at a restaurant and they ask like, oh, who are you? Right? How do you describe yourself? Okay, you might say, I'm a student, or you might say, I'm a person of this generation, or you might say, I'm a sister or a daughter, or a mother or a wife or a girlfriend, or, you might define yourself by other people. You might talk about your religion. You might say, I'm an American. You might say, if you're from Savannah, I'm a Savannian. You might say, you can think about all these different identities that you have, right? Queer identity, heterosexual identity. There's a million, like, think of them almost like hats. And like, we all wear different ones at different times. And for Marx, like, you always have your class hat on. Like right now in this classroom, all you care about is your economic identity. But in fact, I don't think that's true. I think right now we all care about the status of being professors and students. And even we're all women, and I don't even know that we care about that, right? Like, we don't really think about gender probably as much. I mean, things are always there, race, generation, right? Like, there's just a lot of different things you can be. And I think Marx assumes that workers want to be workers all the time. But in fact, workers sometimes just want to like have nice lives. Like, they don't want to burn the whole society down and have a giant revolt and kill all the bourgeoisie and then still work in their factory job, for fewer hours. It's sort of like when Toussaint took over in Haiti, right? Or Bolivar in South America. It's like, yeah, we want change, but we don't want to just be the same people we are, but just without owners. Like, that doesn't seem fair, right? We want to pursue our own dreams. I think for some workers, they don't want to end everything. They just want to be paid a little bit better, have a little bit safer working conditions, and be able to, buy more fresh fruit or whatever. Like the bar is a little bit lower than I think he imagines to keep workers happy, or to make their lives better. And I think that's something he misunderstands, is that capitalism can meet the needs of workers to a certain degree without getting rid of the whole system, like baby in the bathwater kind of thing, if you guys know that saying. Marx wants to throw out like all of capitalism. But it's weird because he wants to keep industrialization. He doesn't say like, let's go all move to the country and be peasant farmers again. Factories are stupid. He's like, let's keep all the benefits of industrialization, but without the pain of factory jobs. But like, factory jobs are, at least according to Marx, right? Like, pretty repetitive and pretty boring. And nobody really wants to do them. So why do we want to create a utopian society where we're all doing that? That seems weird. Do you guys buy some of those criticisms? You don't care? That's okay.
I'm kind of confused about why he wants to distribute everybody across the country. Like, what's the point of that?
Yeah, it's also interesting because he calls peasant life, he says that rural life is idiotic. So I think what he's trying to do is say, like, everyone's crowded up in London and Manchester and Berlin and Milan, and so we need to even them out more. So I don't know that he's going to like forcibly relocate you. Maybe he's just going to make more opportunities. He's going to build jobs in more places so that you're not like everyone's not in New York City, like more people are in Delaware or whatever. Does that help? Budget, does that make sense?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay. I mean, you don't have to think you don't have to buy it, but just sort of that's what he's proposing. Okay, so I think he also underestimates nationalism. Next week, next class, you guys, I opened up a new module. Let me show you. Desktop. I opened up, let me escape here. The new, we're just finishing up module 4. So I opened up the literature in the Great War. So read through the introduction, and then click through, and then you'll be doing on this literature in the Great War poems. So we're moving on to World War I, which is actually all about nationalism. It's all about the British workers being willing to kill German workers. I mean, it's not about class identity at all. Like, Marx completely misunderstands. People feel much more tied to their nation than to their class. So I think he underestimates nationalism because he doesn't care about it. He overestimates class identity, right? Which is also weird because he doesn't really belong to a class. So it's weird that he says everybody's 2 classes. Well, they're not. What about priests? What class are they? What about the aristocrats? What class are they? What about the people who don't work in factories, like all those farmers, right? He simplifies things in a way that doesn't really reflect the reality of what life is like. So I think that's kind of why doesn't it happen like Marx promises. I think he makes some false assumptions. Flexibility of capitalism, an overly simplistic view of class. Okay, we've got some good lists. I think you can also say, this won't work for human nature problems, but that's not as academic of an argument, I think, as some of the other history contextual sides. Anything else on Marx? Other thoughts?
I think the centralization of the means of communication in like the hands of the state is a little dangerous and bad because like they control everything. So how you
That's-
communicate with everyone.
Yeah. No, that's interesting. But I think, I mean, I guess if you guys are good Americans, because Americans, you know, the American Revolution is born of skepticism of government. But you can also think part of it is like, you know, PBS and Sesame Street. Like, let's put on programming that's good for kids and not trying to sell sugary cereals or something, right? Like that can be, I think when Marx talks about that, he's hoping for that, not for Hitler to control your mind. But I think you're right to see it can go either way. I think that's a totally fair anxiety. But what he's trying to say is like, if you've ever listened to NPR or watched the show on PBS, right? Like these are things that don't have to be commercially viable. They don't have to be making money. It's still important to share that kind of programming with the American people that makes the American people better, is the idea. But some people want to defund them, so maybe that's you. Okay, let's look at I want to move to some other responses because I think these problems are, let me share this one. Okay, so we have our communism. Let's look at what happens. So this book comes out in early 1848, and then throughout the year of 1848, there's like revolutions all over Europe. Everywhere you see the little red star here. So in like Denmark and throughout Austria and present day Poland, all the way up through Italy, the whole German area. But none of them are communist revolutions. So Marx is like, I've got all these ideas, they're going to inspire revolution. And then kind of no one cares, like I said, right? Communism is a very minor idea until it becomes really important in the 20th century. So, and I think it's helpful for us to understand what's going on in this society. Like the problems he identifies, I think are somewhat helpful to understand. These are revolutions for liberalism, for more liberties, and these are revolutions for nationalism, more unity of a country. You see how broken up what's going to become Germany and what's going to become Italy is. And so these are against foreign powers that are controlling these areas, Austria too, excuse me, wanting to, they all fail, none of them succeed. But they're the people rising up, and a lot of them are middle-class people, they're students, they're like, you know, law students and university students, they're intellectuals, they're nationalists, they're people who want changes. Just as an example, I'm going to zoom us into Hungary. Buda and Pest, which is now one city, Budapest, but was two at the time. I had put this on the syllabus, but then we didn't, let's see. Okay. Oh, just checking else comments. Am I doing okay on the screen? Is the screen okay? Is it working? Okay, I'm just trying to keep up with the chat. Okay, so I put this guy's name on your syllabus, but then you had enough reading. I didn't give you this. But just to zoom in, another monument reminder. So this is Louis Kossuth, who was a lawyer and a fighter for Hungarian nationalism. The Hungarians were under the control of Austria in the 19th century. Austria controls a huge area that's now a lot of different countries, and Austria now is very small, but it wasn't at the time. And this is just another interesting monument because it's created in 1927 to celebrate Kossuth, and there's actually two more people on either side. So it's him with 8 lawmakers, like celebrating the independence of Hungary, which does eventually happen after World War I. So this monument was probably commissioned right after they got their independence. But then it's taken down when the communists take over after World War II. And it's resituated. We talked about what to do with monuments. They keep Kossuth, but they move all of the parliamentarians and they replace him with a bunch of workers and farmers because they're taken over by communists. So they don't look up to politicians, they look up to workers and farmers is the idea. So they move it somewhere out of town, and Louis Kossuth is now a leader of the proletarian movement. But then in what year, sorry, I can't see, my face is over it. 2015, they actually brought it back and redid it and turned it into the original monument design from 100 years earlier. They renamed the square Kossuth Square, and now it's back to being about Kossuth and the laws. So just again, that point about remembering, right, who gets celebrated and how are they celebrated depends on the values of the culture. So he's a big hero of the 19th century revolutions for nationalism. And again, still a contested figure into the 20th century. We don't need to go on and on about Europe. I think that's kind of enough of the revolutions, but it does spark changes. So look at Prussia across here, these different areas, and look at different areas of Italy. And so these two nations come together in the 1800s. It's an elaborate story that involves diplomacy and wars, fighting with each other, some revolutions from within. But the big story is the creation of Germany. They become, as you may know, if you know about World War I and II, right? They invade all their neighbors twice in a row in the 20th century with the World Wars. So creating a strong Germany is a really important event for world history. But I asked you guys, instead of reading about Germany, I asked you to read about Italy. So the idea of nationalism, I've got the map of Italy here, but it's the same idea, nationalism for all the different places, right? So this idea that people who have the same language, the same customs, the same culture, the same history should be ruled by the same government instead of ruled by a bunch of different places. Nationalism can be, at first, it's very like from the bottom up. It's supposed to be like what the people want. But you may know that it can also be from the top down, like controlled, like let's say Hitler and Mussolini are very nationalistic as you head into the 20th century. So part of the issue is who gets to be a nation, because we've got like Louis Kossuth fighting for Hungary. We've got these people in Italy fighting people in Germany. Mazzini has an answer. So let's look at that reading I asked you guys to do for today. If you've got it, we obviously are skipping the writing exercises because we're on Zoom for today. But I thought Mazzini makes a good, he's writing at the exact same time as Marx. He's also in exile living in London. He's been kicked out of, he's from Genoa. He's been kicked out of his area for being a rebel rouser. They don't run in the same circles at all. You may be able to tell that Mazzini is very much opposed to socialism and communism. So what does Mazzini say are some of the problems? What does he see as the problems in mid 19th century Europe? What do you guys think?
He talked a lot about how there's no time in the day for people to educate themselves and they don't have any means to do that. He talks about how when they're laboring for 10 or 12 hours, you can't earn enough to maintain your families. There's a ton of interruptions and you never know how long you're going to work. That all comes in the way of having a consistent education.
Thank you, Kyrie. That's absolutely right. And so he sees this very busy working class that doesn't have time to improve themselves, right? So how are you ever going to get out of the hole that you're in if you can't ever to get back? I think to Karime's point about education, right? Being a path forward, a path to better jobs, a path to, in the capitalist system, more money, maybe more fulfillment, right? A better understanding of the world, a better understanding of yourself. Good. Other people, what else does he talk about?
He talks a lot about duty versus right. And I feel like that also has to do with education, because once you're educated in like how a society should function, then you're going to have that motivation, and it's going to be like an intrinsic motivation to try to work towards that. And so that's more of like the duty side of it, where you're like willing to sacrifice for it. When like a right is kind of more personal, like individual satisfaction that you're trying to gain. So like the right to own your own business or something that's like focused on you versus like being able to give up something for the like nationalism. And so I think that has to do with it too.
Yeah, you said that so well. I'm glad we recorded it. I think it's great. And I think the point you said, intrinsic motivation, that's a really great way to think about it, because this is not something he wants to impose. Like Marx is like, we're going to have change. We're going to have this bloody revolution. We're going to redistribute the wealth, and then everything's going to be great. And this is not at all the same kind of approach that Mazzini thinks will work. Good. Other thoughts about the Mazzini's identification of problems or proposal for solutions?
He talks a lot about the illusion of liberty for the working class. like how the entire country, not the, I don't know, like the society is basically built on this idea of liberty and that people deserve the right to their own happiness, but the working class doesn't have the means or the time to pursue their happiness or express their liberties.
Yeah. I think this is a really brilliant insight on his part, is that he's living in he's writing these in the 1840s, right, or 1850s. He's 2 generations now from the French Revolution and the American Revolutions. And he's like, okay, we won, right? Like the Declaration of the Rights of Man and Liberty, America, Declaration of Independence, like, okay, we did it, but like, so what, right? Like, what's different for us? We're working hard, we don't have time for education. I mean, who cares if you have the right for free press and free speech if you can't read, or you're not articulate enough to understand how to communicate. You're not educated enough to understand. Like, I think sort of, yeah, we all have liberty, but like, so what? We don't have time to use our liberty. I think it's a really interesting practical response to, I think, what are really important calls in those revolutions, the Atlantic revolutions. But now we're like, okay, but we still have a hard life. Like, so what's next? And I thought it answered really well. I think, you know, it's like phase 2 maybe of the Enlightenment legacies, right? So we have these revolutions, but then like, how do we make them meaningful for people, or useful? So what are his solutions? Marx's solution is this violent overthrow and the reorganization of economic systems. What is Mazzini's solution?
It seems like his main solution is to like promote this idea of unity and the greater good by like educating people and lessening their workday so that they can improve themselves in order to improve the country.
Good. Yeah. In some ways, I'm just thinking of this now. Remember, Bolivar is so worried, like, we're not ready for democracy yet because we haven't educated, like we're not smart enough yet, or y'all aren't, was sort of what he was implying, right, in the Angostura address. And so in a way, without Bolivar's condescension, I think, because if you notice, this is addressed to working men, this is aimed at the workers. And so even though other people are reading it, but what he's trying to say is like, we got to figure out a way for you to get the time, and like, we got to set up some free schools, we've got to go door to door so that you can to see yourself as a citizen. Think about like neighborhoods where there's like a lot of graffiti or a lot of trash on the road. It's like, they don't think of that neighborhood as like representing them. So it's like, take ownership in your identity as being part of this country, right? Like, let's train you, let's teach you to feel proud of let's create a country for you and have you be proud of it and willing to fight for it and willing to share, like to do your duty. I think to Courtney's really important point. So yeah, so education, change, nationalism, let's get you a country, let's get you the right to vote, right? And then you can vote for changes, right, that affect you. You can vote for a shorter working day, you can vote for a minimum wage, you can vote for these changes that you want, you can vote for free schools for your kids, right? Like let's get you a vote, which is really the opposite of Marx's point, right? Mazzini's interested, he wants, keep your private property, right? Keep your income inequality, you know, if that's how it works out, but let's give everyone a fair stake in protecting the system. Does that make sense? Mazzini's really famous in his time. You guys probably have never heard of him, but he is really important to a lot of the ideas. I mean, he and Marx are kind of in the circles, and I would say Mazzini is even more well-known than Marx in his lifetime, but certainly not kind of how it played out over the long term. But I think this idea of the last part, that chapter 5, I just wanted to give you a little bit when he talks about, like, he talks about duties in general, but then he narrows down, right, duties to your country. And this gets us back to the like little screen here. Hold on. Where he's like, look, God made us Italy. Like, I love how he kind of explains that, right? Like, how could we not supposed to be a country? Look how we're shaped. We've got mountains on the top, like we've got water all around us. Obviously, we're supposed to be a country. So he's kind of making this claim. Can you guys hear me still? I think you might have frozen. Yeah, okay, good. Sorry, I'm doing it off my hotspot on my phone, so I'm a little nervous. Okay, so God made us like this country. We're supposed to be a country. So, oh, brothers, love your country, you know, and tie that in. It's not just the territory, right? It's this idea that connects us to each other. Education, labor, right? So you got to keep working in the franchise. Franchise is another word for vote. So let's create a country. Let's make it a democracy. Let's give everyone the vote. Like, you deserve the vote, and then your lives will change, right? So he wants to work, kind of create a new system. He's considered a revolutionary, but what he sees, I think, is what we would understand as a very like middle of the road approach, certainly compared to Marx. Does that make sense?
Mhm.
Okay, I just want you to see that different people are responding to kind of what they see as the problems of the 19th century in different ways. Okay, also, like, so this plays out in an interesting historical way. You have to trust me. In Italy, Mazzini's one of the thinkers that gets it organized, although not the most effective one. And then Bismarck is the leader in Germany, if you've heard his name, that makes Germany a country. So if we were doing just like a Western civ class, we could focus more on that. But I want to move us on to get to kind of more effects of industrialization. Is that okay if I just keep going?
Mhm.
Okay. So let's think about in industrialization and imperialism with the connections. And this is a really cool map I found that shows you what Britain like controlled or influenced around the 1850s, 1860s. So huge British footprint, right? And so they've got these, we think about the British Empire expanding. Britain is, let me move you guys to the side right now, you're there. So Britain's a small little island here. Just a collection of islands, if you include Ireland. But they obviously have this outsized control. So they've got these new trade routes, right? We've got these improvements of shipbuilding and steam power from the Industrial Revolution, from the Silent Revolution. They've got these colonies to produce raw materials. They've got a bustling coal and iron industry. Britain's blessed with a lot of iron deposits just naturally, fueling the Industrial Revolution. And so Britain's not the only one going out in the world. This is something they've done earlier, but these other new places, we've already talked a little bit about Africa, right? And how they expand. And so just to remind you guys of that conversation we had a couple of weeks ago, with the incredible influence that Europe has. So yellow is places specifically controlled by a European country. Purple is governing themselves in European ways. And green is semi-colonial, so that with some strong ties, some forced agreements from the European countries. And in some ways, the Communist Manifesto reflects this, even though it's a little bit early, but part of this trend, right? They talk about, and I saw you guys also notice this in the perusal. It has made the country dependent on the towns, and barbarian and semi-barbarian countries dependent on civilized ones. The East on the West. This is part of what the bourgeoisie, what this revolution has accomplished. And this is, I think, another legacy of industrialization, right? Or part of that legacy we talked about before. If you've got these widgets being produced, these sweaters, whatever, right, nonstop in your factory, you're going to run out of people to sell them to. You need to sell them somewhere. And so you take over these other places so that you can have markets. You can get resources from them to send home, but you can also use them to buy your all the junk that your factories are producing, right? They're overproducing for what people can buy at home. You also have people crowded up, right, with urbanization. So you can send them like, hey, go live, go move to India or go move to Africa, and lessen the urbanization, blah, blah, blah. We talked before about motives, right? I think you guys didn't read The Ferry, but we read The White Man's Burden poem. So just to like a refresher. But now I think we can add back this economic motive and think about it as a Marx motive. So you might say you're going, to bring civilization to the world, kind of the white man's burden theory, right? Like we're going for cultural reasons. Marx says, no, you're going for economic reasons, right? For Marxist historians, the economics are always the motivator. The other stuff is either cover or nonsense or secondary importance. So I just want to reframe that motives conversation we had, but thinking about it now that you know a little bit more about the Marxist history. So yes, people talk about nationalism, patriotism. They're trying to, get their country to pay attention to problems far away instead of problems at home. Yes, we need bases, whatever, this long list of things. But a Marxist historian's like, but still it's about the money. Oops. And then the cultural competition idea, right? The duty, the racism. You guys have seen these before. I just wanted to bring you back up. So we talked about Africa before. But today I want to just zoom in for our last 20 minutes on Japan. Excuse me, the area here. I'll zoom you out and you'll see a bigger map in a second. I haven't talked at all, I think, about Japan. We talked about China being kind of the biggest, most powerful, most advanced, strongest, everything, place in the 1500s and the 1600s into the 1700s. But we haven't really talked about Japan much. So let me just back us up, pretend it's week one again. Japan is ruled by a system of government called the shogunate, like a shogun. It's kind of like a medieval way, if you know anything about medieval Europe, where you have like knights, they have samurai soldiers, you have lords, they have like codes of chivalry, they call it Bushido. If it's not familiar to you, don't worry, it's okay. But anyway, the shogunate system and the family that's ruling, it's called the Tokugawa family. And they take over in around 1600. And it's kind of an amazing growth period for Japan. Tokyo, which is called Edo at the time, has 1 million people in 1750. Probably the largest city in the world, or certainly among the very largest. But they've also developed a sense of isolation. And when 1492 and in the 1500s, Europeans started to go out successfully into the world, right? They're trying to get to the Indian Ocean Pacific area, getting to the New World. We talked about that. Part of that project is a missionary project. So they're sending priests, Catholic priests, especially to convert people. And they're having some success in Japan. And early on in the 1600s, the Japanese rulers feel like, wait a minute, these are anti-Japanese ideas. These are not Japanese people. Get out. And so they expel all the foreigners, which are mostly missionaries, but also traders and merchants. And they close their borders in the 1630s. And they start having all these rules. So like, I don't know, I haven't know if I've given you guys a study abroad pitch yet, but I think all of you should study abroad, either in the summer or first semester or something. It's so important to go experience another culture. For Japan in this time period, it's the opposite. It's illegal to leave Japan. If you leave Japan, you can't come back. You can't study abroad. You can move, but then you're locked out. They don't want any foreign ideas coming in. But actually, they seem to be doing well, right? Like they've got this successful city, they've got high literacy rates. So it seems like things are okay. I took the Nagasaki slide out. They do allow trade with one city, Nagasaki, with the Dutch. I think they can have ships come once every 6 months, like one ship or something. So they're getting some trade, but they're not having the kind of cultural connections that, say, the rest of the world is having with each other, or certainly the Europe forging with the rest of the world. Okay, so fast forward our story. They're thriving. They're on their own. And then let's think about Japan in 1830. There were two paintings that you guys looked at. The Hokusai. They're both from the Mount Fuji series. The one from the New York Times and the Great Wave. First of all, could everyone get into the New York Times one? We stop sharing for a second. Yeah. Okay. Now you have a free New York Times subscription if you had to make your own. So enjoy it. The whole time you're at Georgia Southern. All right, what do we make of that? I can call up the article, but what do we learn about Japan in the 1830s? How does the analysis of this print, what does it tell us about life in the Tokugawa shogunate in the 1830s? Anyone want to jump in?
Which one are you referring to?
Yeah,
So
which one?
think about, I mean, it could be either one because they're both, I mean, the other one goes you into the 1850s more. Well, they both kind of go beyond the scene. But the one with the wind and the papers flying.
Okay, so for that one, they made like a lot of emphasis on how like there wasn't like a specific focus. It was like a very like general picture where they had like the woman and the papers flying away,
Yeah.
and then like different people doing different things and representing different. And like they pointed out that only like one man had like his face clearly depicted, and everybody else was kind of just there. But everything was very like blocky.
Okay. Yeah, excellent. Other thoughts? Excuse me.
I was struggling with understanding the importance of the mountain, but I did notice like the positioning of the mountain and like the way he painted it, especially in the one in the New York Times, like how there was not very much detail in it, and versus the way that he painted it with the waves like literally in the middle of the ocean,
Yeah.
well behind it.
So do you guys know, have you seen either one of those paintings before? Probably the Great Wave you've seen before. People have like t-shirts of it. So the series that's really famous called 36 Views of Mount Fuji. So it's just sort of his hook as a way to show like different aspects of Japanese life with the mountain. So the mountain's really not even the point. I think it's just like views of Japan is the point, but because he did it as a series, I mean, the mountain's in all of them. I know we're not an art class, it's our second kind of deep dive into art. But I do feel like that, so maybe go back to that idea of cultural fusion, right? That we talked about with Akbar's reign, well, with all of the Renaissance art. So where do we see, how are these Japanese paintings examples of cultural fusion, considering they're made at a time when their society's locked down, basically?
I remember reading about how like they weren't very widely accepted because of their European views, not views, but fusion.
Good, what else?
I think material wise, it doesn't like the blue ink come from the Dutch.
Good. Yeah. It's called Prussian blue. It comes from Germany. And they're saying even if it's made in China and they got it from China, it's invented in Germany. So clearly, I think it makes us ask like, wait, how isolated are they? Right? Because, okay, yes, the government wants no anti-Japanese ideas or no ideas that aren't local, but clearly they're getting in. Clearly, these are people that are sort of hungry for connection at some level, right? They've got exotic ink colors. In the Great Wave, they talked about perspective, which is that kind of European Renaissance invention. So they've seen that there are books that are coming from the Dutch that have Renaissance paintings in there, and artists are studying them and looking at them. So you guys couldn't tell from these, but there's also books about medicine coming in, and they're learning like, wait, what do the other doctors know that we don't know? You know, books about how the human body, like they think it this way, like, oh, wait, this book says it's something different. So there is some sharing of knowledge, even though it's much more limited. Other fusion aspects. I mean, what about the way these artworks carry Japan into new places? Maybe not just like how they reflect Japan, but how are they then like part of a worldwide conversation later? What did you guys learn about that?
I thought it was really cool that it was talking about how it was like really popular in France. It's like at that festival or whatever, like they had the screens and everybody was going crazy over it. That was really cool.
Yeah. Yeah, like the World's Fair. Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of us might be more familiar with European art, French art, but it's like, wait, French art's copying Japanese art, which is then influenced by European art. Like kind of, it's much more interconnected maybe. I really like that guy, Jason Farago, who made that one. He has a bunch of other ones too, where you kind of scroll through it. It's easier for me to understand a painting when you kind of zoom in and out like that. I felt like that was kind of helpful. Did you guys think that was an interesting way to look at a painting, or did it snag on you? How did it work? Allison's nodding. It worked okay? I know it's kind of long, but if you just scroll through, I like that it's sort of very visual. It's almost like a better PowerPoint, a better version of PowerPoint, I think, or something. So all right, well, keep that in mind. The way that the cultural exchange, I think, is one of the main ideas that we want to think about, and the long-term legacy and how Japan becomes sort of having been in such lockdown, right? It becomes even more like stylish. I guess. Let me get back to the PowerPoint and we can think about what's going to happen next. So we've got our motion here, and I'll put the PowerPoint on Folio. I've been trying to put the other ones on after I use them, if you guys are seeing on Folio, if you need them. Okay, here we are. Let me get us big. I'm showing screen, right? Yeah. Okay. So Hokusai, the Great Wave. So this is another one that they, especially this is from the British Museum. So when it says we, it means the British Museum. So what do we know about, what do we learn about this painting and what it reveals, or what does it tell us it reveals about Japan, kind of right on this cusp before there's great change happening?
The The pairing of the actual wave, the fluidity of the ocean with the European materials and techniques shows a desire for cultural fusion.
Nice. That's put very nicely. Other thoughts? Was there something new you saw in this painting you hadn't seen before once either? Because they also go over it a little bit in the New York Times thing, but in the article. Anything that you saw differently once it talked to you?
I remember them saying that like the fishermen on the boats like looked really scared, and I can't really see their faces, so I had never really noticed that before. But I mean,
Yeah. Okay, that's fair. Other thoughts? Where are we in watching this? Like as a viewer?
Okay, so I didn't understand because it said that some viewers confuse like foam. So the foam on the waves. So like to me that did look like foam, kind of.
Yeah.
So I didn't understand like how
They mean
that would.
confusing it with the mountain. So here's the mountain in the back, which looks like the
Oh,
foam.
okay.
Yeah, I think that's, can you see my cursor? Yeah, it's like the mountain. The mountain is almost the same color, so it sort of looks like, oh, is that another wave? Like, oh no, that's a mountain. That may be part of it. You might not even know it's a mountain. If you look at it, it looks like a bunch of water. I think we're on another boat, right? Like we're floating here allegedly. Right? Because we're not right on land, I don't think. And so I think we're kind of in the same boat, literally, as these fishermen. So it's this exciting, exotic, like view, but it's also kind of terrifying, right? Like they're in these tiny boats. I think you can't see their faces, but if you look at it, it's actually a very destabilizing image for, I don't know what to think more about why is it so meaningful to so many people, because it is so iconic. And so we think of it as like, oh, so Japanese. And it's like, well, wait, is it really Japanese? And I think the idea of the perspective and the color, and it's really capturing this moment. It's a little bit early, but it's sort of the cusp of this moment when things start to change. So Europeans are going out in the world, and they're not just going to Africa, they're also going to the Pacific. So you can see here, the British are taking over India, the Dutch are taking over what's the East Indies, which they've controlled for a while. France is taking over Vietnam and soon to be Thailand as well. The US has the Philippines. And so here's Japan getting a little bit worried, right? Like China's got these agreements with, there's a bunch of wars, the Opium Wars with Britain. So China's sitting here like, oh my gosh, like when's our turn? And so it happens in the 1850s. And that's one thing I liked about that article, is it connects you with the artwork, with the history. And so Commodore Matthew Perry, as you know, shows up in the 1850s, 1853. This is some depictions from the Japanese point of view, sailing in the ship's steamship, right? They're obviously very impressed by the steam. They've not had an industrial revolution, right? They've developed a sophisticated, literate, wealthy society, but they're not partaking of a lot of the changes that have happened by the time we get to the 1850s in America and the Western world. So what is the threat? What does Matthew Perry want? Do you guys remember? What do the Americans want? We won't put it all on Commodore Perry's shoulders.
They're trying to force Japan to trade with the rest of the countries in the world and participate in global economy.
Absolutely, right? Open up your borders. We want to buy your stuff. You're producing beautiful things. We all want them. And we want you to buy our stuff. And so on the one hand, they're not trying to take over Japan the way they take over Africa. Although the Japanese might feel that way. The Japanese are forced to sign these unequal treaties. And remember, Matthew Perry says, like, I've showed up today with only 4 ships because I know you're going to be so agreeable and you're going to sign right here. And if you don't, we're coming back, right? We're coming back next spring. So this is the threat that's sometimes referred to as gunboat diplomacy. Like, I'm negotiating with you, but at the barrel of a gun. And so this is another view of how the Japanese view the Western ships, right? It's very menacing. It's this scary, belching, like villain almost, right? Like this is almost like a gaping mouth. What's coming out of the holes here? It looks like laser beams, but they don't have lasers. What comes out of these holes?
Yeah, it looks like the aftermath of a cannon, or they're
Absolutely.
actually shooting cannons.
Yeah, it's a cannonball, right? So it's like an imagined version. I mean, you can't take a photograph of it, but the fire shooting out, each of these is a cannon. So literally it is gunboat diplomacy, right? We're sailing in these boats rigged with cannons, and we're going to blow you up and blow up your navy, and we're not going to come back until you do what we say. So this is going to really destabilize the Tokugawa shogunate, right? Because their whole identity has been for 250 years, right, to basically be locked down away from the rest of the world and in control of the ideas that their people are exposed to. And so once the Westerners start showing up, especially a lot of sailors, especially a lot of Americans, the culture starts to change. So this is Singing by the Plum Garden. What looks Western here in this image?
I want to say their clothes.
Absolutely, right? The whole style of their clothes. I mean, maybe you're not an expert on 1887 style, but it's very much looks like the dresses they'd be wearing in France or New York. Look at the little boy. He's at a military school, but he's wearing a Western uniform. So they've adopted some Western style uniforms. The piano itself, I would guess, is Western. But there's still a lot that seems Japanese. The cherry blossoms, the prints on there seem to be a little more Japanese, right? The layout of the room, the fact that it's on a wood block print, it's this Japanese style. So it's, again, like this cultural fusion. And so what's going to happen is the Japanese are going to take what they like. They're going to take baseball. If you've ever wondered why there's so many famous Japanese baseball players, it's in part because of this, because the sailors show up and they teach the Japanese people baseball, and it becomes part of their culture, compared to like maybe fewer Japanese basketball or football players. So some of the stuff they like, but then there's a part of society that's going to be critical. Oh my God, the Japanese we're like monkeys, right? We're dressed in European styles. We're trying to ape the foreigners. And also this is especially loaded because of the ideas of Darwin are coming through with evolution and these ideas of like, what are these Westerners all about? So some people are criticizing the Japanese buy-in, but they're going to have to renegotiate. And so what we see is a period of transition, not just cultural transition, but also political transition, kind of shaken up by the arrival of the Americans. And all of a sudden, they're going to immediately turn their culture and their values around. They're like, okay, now everybody go study abroad, quick. Like go to Germany, study the Constitution, study the factories, go to America, go to France. How are they working? How are they building? What kind of military technology do they have? What kind of strategies do they have? Like quick. And so they're going to really go out of their way, and they're going to industrialize like from a very top down way. The government's going to control it. And we get a different government. It's called the Meiji Restoration. Meiji means enlightened one, and it's the new emperor. There had always been an emperor during the shogunate, but he wasn't very powerful. And now all of a sudden he's going to step back in and be like, okay, now I'm in charge and I'm going to create this new government. And they create a constitutional monarchy with an emperor in charge. They create political parties. And here's an emperor, the same guy, and he can do both things. He can be traditionally Japanese and he can be Western. What do you need, right? This cultural fusion. Who should I be in what moment? I can do both. There's a great quote. I didn't have you guys read anything written at the time in Japan, but they said, let's keep the ethics of the East, like our way of life, our values, and the technology of the West, right? Let's get what we need. Why are they in such a hurry to change their government, change their technology, change their military? Can you guys guess? In 1 minute. What's the fear? What if they don't do that?
They need to keep up, so they don't kind of get taken over, I guess, because they need to.
Yeah, it's an existential threat to them, right? Like, oh my God, what are we going to do? Are we going to be the Philippines? Are we going to be French Indochina? Are we going to be India? Are we going to get taken over? No, we are not, right? We're going to reframe, and we're literally, there's a quote, I have you guys big and I forgot to print it out. But basically, like, we're going to join the civilized nations. And we know civilized is like code word here, right? That we want a seat like at the table with the civilized nations, not to be treated like a barbarian nation, which means we want to be one of the imperial powers, right? I had some poems, but we can skip our poems. And so what we see by 1875, they're industrializing. So you've got railroads, you've got factories developing, the government spending a ton of money to do this very quickly. They're suffering a lot of the same problems that Britain saw, too long work days, child labor, exploitation, but they're going to power through. And then they start taking over their own neighbors. They take over Korea in 1910. They take over Taiwan in 1895. They're going to take over, they're going to go into China in the 1930s. And then they're going to hit Pearl Harbor, right, in 1941. They are like, we can also be a power. Asia for the Asians, they say. We're going to get rid of these Europeans, and then we'll be the dominant power. So in a way, they want to avoid being taken over, but then they will go a step farther and want to be the ones that actually take over. It's a very unusual imperialism story because like when we do the India story, they lose, they get taken over until after World War II, where they get their independence. Africa, right? Everybody but Ethiopia gets taken over. But Japan has this sort of pivot moment where they're able to capitalize on this new knowledge and really take advantage of it and become an imperial power. Maybe not for the benefit of their neighbors. Questions or thoughts? I know that was super fast. We had like 3 main things to cover: our communism, our nationalism, and our Japan cultural fusion story. Any last minute thoughts, questions? Thanks for zooming in. I hope everybody stays safe and dry. I think we'll all be back to normal Tuesday. It looks like it's going to go a little bit north of us, which should be great. Reach out to me if you need me. And for Tuesday, just work on the lesson 1 in the folio module. Yeah. All right. Thanks, guys. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye. Be safe, guys.
Bye.